I was an 18-year-old handsome young man, admired by many girls, but I paid no attention to anyone. However, my aunt, whom I considered like a mother, ruined my youth. Every night she would give me warm milk. As soon as I drank it, I'd become drowsy and lose consciousness. What happened afterwards left me utterly shocked. You must watch this story to the end because it will leave you stunned. If you liked our last video, comment yes below and subscribe to our channel. My beauty was unparalleled. At 18, I was a tall and broad-shouldered young man. People often talk about the beauty of women, but as a man, I was so strikingly handsome that people couldn't help but turn to take a second look. Yet I never let it get to my head. When my university holidays began, I decided to spend some time at my aunt's home. She lived far from the city in a remote, quiet area because she couldn't afford to live in a better location. Her circumstances had forced her to settle there. She had a daughter, Sakina, who I liked very much. As soon as my break started, I went to my aunt's house, hoping to spend time with Sakina. She was a simple, innocent girl, so different from the girls I knew in the city. I loved my aunt dearly, so spending time with her was something I looked forward to. When I arrived, she was thrilled to see me. She hugged me tightly and prepared a room for my stay. Sakina, knowing I'd be there for 20 days, set up the room and placed all my essentials inside. The entire day, I couldn't keep my eyes off Sakina. I watched her as she went about her chores, admiring her simplicity and charm. My aunt kept herself busy with household tasks, but I kept glancing at Sakina, thinking of ways I could spend more time with her. That evening, I planned to take her up to the rooftop. The area was surrounded by open fields and lush orchards, and the nighttime breeze brought a refreshing coolness. I imagined us sitting under the stars, talking and enjoying the serene atmosphere. However, before I could act on my plan, my aunt entered my room. I was lying on the bed at the time, feeling relaxed. She came in and sat down beside me, placing a glass of milk on the side table. Gently stroking my cheek, she said, "You've become so thin. It seems you don't take care of yourself in the city. You kids eat so much fast food and unhealthy snacks. It's no wonder your health has declined, and your mother should have been more attentive to your well-being. Now drink this milk. It's pure and fresh. There's a dairy nearby, and I personally bring this milk for you. Just wait. Within a few days, you'll start feeling strong and healthy again." Her concern made me smile. I took the glass and drank it, grateful for her care. After I finished, she added, "You should take better care of yourself. You're so handsome, so young. Boys like you are very rare." I brushed it off as affection from an aunt who cared deeply for me. Her words didn't seem out of place. After all, she had always been like a second mother to me. Smiling, I placed the empty glass aside. Then, without warning, she pulled me into a tight hug. "When I see you," she said softly, "I'm reminded of your late father. You look just like him. Same face, same youthfulness. He was so young when he left us. Life was so unfair to him." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I had always missed my father, and hearing her talk about him like that stirred up old memories. She wiped her own tears and said, "All right, go on. Lie down now." I wanted to mention that I was planning to go up to the rooftop with Sakina, but I hesitated. What would my aunt think? Would she find it improper? Embarrassed, I kept quiet and simply lay down, letting her words and the day's events play over in my mind. My aunt didn't know about the love between Sakina and me, so I lay back down and started chatting with her. But after only a short while, I began to feel a strange drowsiness. Soon the night faded away, and I had no memory of what happened until morning. When I awoke, what I saw left me utterly stunned. There was filth on my body. It was as if the world shifted beneath me. The next day, my friend Faraz nudged me as we sat on a bench near campus. "Look at that girl," he said, pointing discreetly. "She's staring right at you." I glanced briefly at the girl in question, a newcomer named Majabin, who was watching me with a faint smile. Her gaze was direct and unrelenting, almost expectant. Faraz raised an eyebrow and waited for my response, but I quickly turned my head. "Girls like her don't interest me," I said dismissively. Faraz looked surprised. "What are you talking about? She's beautiful. Any guy would be crazy about her. Who do you think you're holding out for? Some heavenly maiden?" I chuckled and shook my head. "I'm looking for someone whose beauty makes me forget every other face, whose presence makes the entire world feel dull by comparison. Faraz's eyes widened in disbelief, and then he burst out laughing. You've got to be kidding. Someone like that only exists in fairy tales. I grinned and shrugged, and we continued walking toward the classroom. A few minutes later, Majabin entered. It turned out she was a new admission, and she'd be studying alongside us. In our co-ed college, it wasn't uncommon for boys and girls to sit next to each other. Sure enough, with no other open spots in the middle rows, Majabin ended up sitting next to me. Faraz was on my other side, and as the lecture began, I tried my best to focus on what the teacher was saying. Still, I couldn't help but feel her gaze flickering toward me now and then. She had placed her bag between us, but her attention seemed entirely on me. I found it unnerving. If she'd really wanted, she could have chosen a seat at the back, where there were plenty of open spots. But she sat here, beside me. Why? When the lecture ended and we had a short break, I motioned for her to move aside so Faraz and I could leave the row. Instead of moving, she remained seated, looking directly at me. Won't you introduce yourself? She asked, her tone both bold and curious. Faraz's lips curled into a knowing smile. He had picked up on her interest in me and was clearly enjoying the moment. I sighed, glancing at her briefly before responding. My name's Shahbaz. Like you, this is my first year in the BBA program. Do you need something? The harshness in my voice caught her off guard, and she suddenly looked nervous. I gestured again for her to stand so we could leave, and she quietly moved aside. I grabbed my bag and headed out of the classroom, but I could still feel her eyes on my back. As I reached the doorway, I glanced over my shoulder. Sure enough, she was still staring. I turned away quickly and walked toward the canteen. Man, you really know how to break a girl's heart, Faraz teased, catching up to me. She's gorgeous. Nobody's saying you have to marry her, but at least have a little fun. Flirt a bit. It'll keep you entertained while we're at university. I swung my bag lightly at his head. Have some shame, Faraz. I'm not here to mess around. I'm here to study. And when it comes to love, I've made a promise to myself. I'll only marry the one I truly love. I don't believe in dividing my heart. Faraz rolled his eyes and laughed. You're unbelievable, Shahbaz. But that's what makes you different, I guess. Hearing me out, Faraz raised an eyebrow. Oh, so you're a poet now, he teased. Look, all these fancy ideals you're spewing are straight out of some novel. Give it a few weeks at this university, and these Majabins you're brushing off will be all over you. You'll find yourself enjoying the attention, chatting with them, making friends. Before you know it, you'll start flirting too. He said it with the kind of knowing smirk that made it seem as if he believed I was just like every other guy, a man easily swayed by a woman's attention. I shook my head firmly. Mark my words, that won't happen, I replied. My heart knew where its loyalty lay, but Faraz and everyone else had no idea. I loved Sakina, and in my mind she was the only one for me. Days passed, and the girl Faraz had mentioned earlier, Nurain, kept appearing around me. She seemed to hover nearby wherever I went, like a persistent shadow. When I sat in the canteen, she'd take a seat at my table. If I went to the library, she'd find her way to the same aisle. In class, the moment she spotted an empty seat near me, she'd claim it without hesitation. Her persistence irritated me. I found it unsettling how she threw herself into my orbit. For me, respect, self-respect, was paramount. I believed that just as men should maintain their dignity, women too should value their self-worth. The way Nurain seemed to disregard that principle bothered me deeply. One day I decided to confront her. We were sitting in class, I was taking notes, focused on the lecture, and she was silently staring at me. I could feel her gaze, and it was beginning to distract me. Finally, I closed my notebook and turned to her. Nurain, I said evenly, do you have no sense of self-respect? She blinked, startled, and looked at me, unsure of how to respond. I continued, my voice steady but firm. Everyone should have enough self-respect not to lower themselves for someone else. You follow me everywhere, stare at me, and linger around as if you have no pride. A respectable girl wouldn't behave like this. You're beautiful, you're smart, and you're capable. If you focus on your own life, you'll earn the respect you deserve. But instead, you've allowed your actions to make you the talk of the university. Everyone knows you're chasing me, and I don't like it. I paused, giving her time to absorb my words. I came here to study, not to toy with anyone's emotions. If I were like other guys, I might have taken advantage of your attention, pretended to fall in love, and then walked away after a few fleeting moments of fun. But I won't do that. I won't be that guy. You need to prioritize your self-respect. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a hurt look in her eyes, she finally spoke. I love you, Shahbaz. I truly do. I'm not playing games. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I just want to be with you. But the way you push me away, it hurts. Ever since I came to this university, you've been the only person I've cared about. Can't you see that? Can't you accept my love? I shook my head. No, Nurain. I can't accept love from someone who doesn't respect herself. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity. A respectable person values their self-worth and doesn't let it slip away for anyone. The way you're chasing after me, it's not right. It's not how love should be. Her eyes brimmed with tears. She looked at me, her voice breaking. One day, Shahbaz, you'll understand. One day you'll fall in love, and you'll see how love forces you to put your pride and your ego aside. Love makes you willing to step over your own boundaries, just to be near the one you care about. With that, she got up and walked out of the classroom, leaving me sitting there, lost in thought. Her words echoed in my mind, making me question my own feelings. But then I reminded myself, I already knew who I loved. Sakina had my heart, and her love wasn't something that needed to be tested or proven. I didn't need to wander or waver. I was confident that I could make her mine through the proper, lawful way. I pushed Nurain's words to the back of my mind and focused on the path I had chosen, the path that would lead me to the one I truly loved. In my mind's eye, Sakina's image danced across the screen of my imagination. She was breathtakingly beautiful, yet more than that, she was modest and dignified. She had never once taken the first step toward me. Even when I reached out, her gaze would remain lowered, her demeanor wrapped in layers of shyness and propriety. She was a delicate beauty who had found a home in the streets of my heart. I couldn't think of anyone but her. Nurain was undeniably gorgeous, but no one could take Sakina's place. I couldn't explain that to Nurain, no matter how much I wanted to. The next day, there she was again, trailing behind me all around the university. Her persistence was unrelenting, and the whispers that followed me grew louder. People chuckled quietly, their words tinged with mockery. What kind of man runs away from a woman's attention? They said. But what could I tell them? I wasn't avoiding her because I was peculiar. I was simply a man of principle, someone who had no interest in drawing close to a woman who wasn't meant for me. 2 or 3 months passed in this way, and then Nurain stopped coming to the university. Rumors swirled that she had dropped out of her studies altogether. I didn't know the reason. People speculated that it was because of me, that her unrequited affection had driven her away. You could have at least been nice to her, they said. Maybe then she wouldn't have given up on her education. I couldn't fathom it. How could someone throw away their future over unreciprocated feelings? It seemed unthinkable. Time moved on. Our first semester ended, exams wrapped up, and we were granted a month-long break. I was thrilled. I wanted to spend some time in peace and quiet. I informed my mother of the vacation and told her I planned to spend part of it at my aunt's house. The moment I mentioned it, a strange expression crossed my mother's face. She hesitated, then said, "Why do you keep wanting to go there? What's the need? I've been waiting for your vacation so you can spend time at home. There are so many things to do around here." Her tone surprised me. It was clear she didn't like the idea. Still, I wrapped my arms around her and said, "Mom, she's your younger sister. She lives so far away with so few resources. She can't visit us often. I just want to spend a few days with her, talk to her, and enjoy the tranquility of her home. It's such a peaceful place. Please, let me go." My mother sighed heavily and took my hand. "Son," she began, "I know she's your aunt, but you need to understand that she has a young daughter. It's not appropriate for you to stay there like that." Her words left me puzzled. She always seemed uneasy whenever I mentioned my aunt. If I talked about visiting her, or even just called her on the phone, my mother would give me a strange look, her eyes clouded with disapproval. More than once I asked, "Don't you like it when I talk to her?" "What's wrong?" She would fall silent for a long time before finally saying, "It's nothing like that. But she never calls or visits us. Why should you keep bringing her up?" I tried to reason with her. "She's struggling, Mom. If she doesn't reach out, why can't we? She's family after all." But my mother wouldn't reply and the tension would hang in the air. This time her disapproval was more evident than ever. I smiled reassuringly and said, "Don't worry, I won't do anything improper." Despite her unease, I packed my bags. I was determined to spend those 20 days at my aunt's house. My mother watched me leave, her expression unreadable, as I set off to my aunt's home once again. Riding my motorcycle, the wind rushing past, I felt exhilarated. The prospect of seeing Sakine after 6 months filled me with a joy I couldn't explain. This time I was planning a longer visit to my aunt's home, something I'd never done before. Usually I would go in the morning and return by evening. Convincing my mother to let me go hadn't been easy. She was adamant against it. It wasn't until I called my aunt and explained that my mother wasn't letting me come that she intervened. My aunt spoke to my mother and somehow managed to change her mind. Reluctantly, my mother gave her permission. I didn't want to leave on bad terms with my mother, so I made sure everything was settled. Once I arrived at my aunt's house, she greeted me warmly. We hadn't seen each other in a long time, and she pulled me into a tight embrace, kissed my forehead, and said, "This time I'm not letting you leave so easily." Smiling, I asked, "Oh, really? And how do you plan to do that?" She laughed, a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. "You'll see. By the end of these holidays, you won't forget them." Her tone intrigued me, but I laughed it off and she headed to the kitchen. A few minutes later, Sakina appeared, and my heart skipped a beat. Just the sight of her sent a rush of emotions through me. I approached her and quietly said, "I'm going to tell my mother about us soon. I'll ask her to arrange our marriage." Her cheeks flushed a deep red. She looked down shyly and hurried back to her room. That sweet, modest reaction of hers, so different from the city girls I knew, was what won me over every time. My aunt had prepared a room for me, and the serene countryside surroundings made me feel refreshed. It was a welcome escape from the fast-paced city life, which had begun to wear me down. The day passed pleasantly. However, nighttime came early in this rural area. The electricity supply was unreliable, and my aunt's home relied mostly on rechargeable lamps and oil lamps for light. As evening fell, the soft, dim glow of a lamp filled my room. I was thinking about how to get Sakina to join me on the rooftop under the stars when my aunt walked in. She handed me a glass of milk and sat with me, chatting for a while. As soon as I finished the milk, a heavy drowsiness settled over me. The rest of the night passed in a blur, and I didn't remember anything until the morning. When I woke up, I was shocked. My shirt was gone, the sheet had slid down to the floor, and my body felt unclean, sticky with something I couldn't identify. A wave of confusion and dread swept over me. I couldn't figure out what had happened or how it had happened. I thought about discussing it with my aunt or even Sakina, but I felt too ashamed. I decided to keep quiet. The following night, the same thing happened. I lay down to sleep, and my aunt brought me another glass of milk. She stayed for a while, talking to me as before, and then I drifted into that same state of half-consciousness. The next thing I knew, it was morning again, and I found myself in the same unsettling condition. This time, I couldn't stay silent. I approached Sakina and, with a hesitant tone, asked her if she knew anything about what was happening. She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and confusion. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice laced with amusement. Then, laughing loudly, she said, "It sounds like you're trying to prank me, but I'm not falling for it." Her laughter only deepened my frustration. "I'm not joking," I said sharply, fixing her with a serious stare. "I'm not so shameless that I'd make up something like this as a joke." Seeing my mood darken, she stopped laughing. All right, I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I have no idea what's going on. Maybe you did something yourself in your sleep?" Her dismissive response left me feeling even more isolated. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint it, and now even Sakina wasn't taking me seriously. After hearing her words, I felt a wave of shame wash over me, and I fell silent. But the pattern didn't stop. For 2 more nights, the same thing happened. In total, 4 nights in a row, I would drink the milk, slip into a half-conscious state, and wake up in the morning to find that my body was dirty with something strange. Over time, I began to feel increasingly unwell. I grew weaker and weaker. Just standing made me feel dizzy, and the mere thought of eating made me nauseous. I couldn't understand what was happening to me. On the 5th day, my condition worsened. I couldn't even gather the strength to stand. I told my aunt, "I don't know what's happening. Please send me back to the city. I can't even ride my bike in this state." She immediately refused. "No, no," she said. "I can't send you back like this. Your mother will think I didn't take care of you properly. I'll call a doctor instead." A doctor came, prescribed some medicine, and my aunt began giving it to me. Another day passed. 6 nights had now come and gone, and the 7th was beginning. I felt so weak that it was an effort just to keep my eyes open. That night, my aunt brought another glass of milk. Instead of drinking it, I discreetly disposed of it when she wasn't looking, not wanting to upset her. I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep. I was already so weak that keeping my eyes open was a struggle. Believing I was asleep, my aunt began to act. She removed the sheets from my body, threw them aside, and started murmuring something under her breath. "This is the last night," she said. "After this, it will be exactly how I want it to be." She then lit small oil lamps all around me. Their flickering flames surrounded me, casting a strange, almost hypnotic light. I felt a stifling heat, as if the air itself was pressing down on me. It could have been the effect of her chant or the lamps. Either way, it was overwhelming. Unable to feign sleep any longer, I sat up. My aunt's eyes widened in shock. "What are you doing?" she gasped. "How dare you break the circle?" Her anger and surprise stunned me. "What is going on here?" I demanded. "Why are you doing this to me?" She glared at me with such contempt that it made my skin crawl. "You fool," she spat. "How dare you disrupt my work? This was the final night. I was about to ruin you forever, but you woke up. How did you wake up?" Her words were venomous. I demanded answers. "Why are you doing this? Why do you want to destroy me?" Laughing bitterly, she replied, "Because I hate you and your mother. I loved your father, but your mother married him instead. I ended up with a poor man and a miserable life, while your mother lived in luxury. When your father died, I was delighted. It was my black magic that killed him. And now it's your turn. I will see you dead while you're still young. Your mother always suspected me. That's why she never wanted you to visit. But this time, I sweet-talked her into allowing it. Now tonight is your last night. After this, you won't survive. You'll die in agony, just as I've suffered all these years. Your mother will mourn you for the rest of her life." Our raised voices must have startled Sakina, because she suddenly appeared, wide-eyed and shaken. She must have overheard everything, because she looked horrified. I couldn't stay there another minute. Without even grabbing my belongings, I ran out of the house. My bike was the only means of escape. Ignoring my aunt's attempts to stop me, I jumped on it and sped away, heading toward the city. Her shouting faded as I put the distance between us, leaving her ritual incomplete. Once home, I told my mother everything. She wept bitterly and said, "I had my suspicions, but I never wanted to believe it. I never imagined my own sister could do such a thing." The next day brought news that left us all shaken to the core. Sakina's sudden death devastated me, and my aunt's mental state quickly deteriorated. She was found running wildly through the streets, completely unhinged. My mother sought guidance from a religious scholar who explained that since the black magic my aunt had intended for me was left incomplete, it backfired on her instead. The consequences were tragic. She lost her daughter and her sanity. Although I survived, my own health had been severely affected. I was still weak, but the same spiritual healer treated me and gradually brought me back to a stable condition. Despite my recovery, I was consumed with sorrow. I loved Sakina deeply, and her loss left me shattered. For days, I couldn't overcome the pain. When the next semester began, I returned to university. To my surprise, I saw Nurain's face again. She explained that she had fallen seriously ill, which is why she had dropped out mid-semester. Now she was restarting her studies from the beginning. I spoke to her gently, saying, "Once I secure a job, I'd like to send a proposal for you." She stared at me in disbelief. Tears of joy sparkled in her eyes. I couldn't have Sakina, but I wanted Nurain to find happiness. The truth was, she had always been sincere in her feelings. She had never looked at anyone else, and I realized she deserved the chance to be loved. My heart still carried the burden of losing Sakina, but I knew that Nurain's steadfast devotion deserved recognition. I resolved that as soon as I found steady work, I would ask her to be part of my life. Sakina's absence will always weigh on my heart, but Nurain's loyalty gave me a new reason to move forward.